Welcome to the Char Chit Chat, a podcast exploring all things biochar related, coming to you from a small sheep and tree farm in the deep south of New Zealand. All right, thank you, James McNally, for joining us today. I'd like to start by asking you, where are you currently residing?
Hi there, I'm in Hawke's Bay, New Zealand, based down in a lifestyle block in Napier. Beautiful spot of the country and a beautiful day today.
Yeah, cool. And where do you say you're from, and where did you grow up?
I say I'm from Hatfield, England, which is just down London. And I sort of, my go-to line is, my mum's a northerner and a farmer's daughter. My dad's a Londoner and a more urban, so it's obviously southern. So I'm a good mix. And then where did I grow up? When I was 12, we emigrated from the UK to New Zealand to run a backpackers. We ran that all through my high school years, and then they ran it on from there for 13 years. Yeah, great place to grow up. I often joke that I want to go a science degree, but it's given me my most employable skills.
Yeah. All right. What age bracket do you fit into?
I'm 34, so I suppose that's that 30 to 39 bracket.
Yeah. What keeps you busy these days?
As a day job, I work for Land-Based Training, which is an organisation that primarily deals with what we call youth guarantees. So often people where high school hasn't worked out for them, and we provide a variety of training paths. I particularly do horticulture, but we also have pest control, civil and infrastructure, agriculture, and integrated literacy and numeracy. And I'm primarily based down at a place called JJ Organics, a farm that got taken over by the Matthews family a couple of years ago. And prior to them buying it, the previous owners, two lovely ladies, but the weeds kept crawling up and the jobs kept coming, and so they were able to sell to their friends and keep it from becoming a how would you describe basically another set of housing. It was certified organic. And then the other space we work in is down at Equestrian Park, down at where all the horses are out the back of Flaxmere. So I've been primarily this year with JJ's just dealing with the overgrowth and starting to get stuff growing there, though they're already growing their stuff as well. But yeah, the challenges of relatively small number of hands on a decent sized plot. And I suppose we'll get into it more along the way, but looking forward to making some biochar there. I haven't had the chance to yet. Sort of a combination of the seasons, I generally think of it as an autumn activity exclusively, but lady who owns it is having a lovely holidays, her first in a couple of years. So I didn't want to ask to light fires on her property while she was out the country. So she'll be back in a few weeks, and yeah, looking forward to getting into it then.
Okay. Please tell us about your interest in biochar.
It's been a while since when you first got into it, it was, I suppose I read the biochar solution and got a bit of that anthropology of it. And then I saw Phil at Horticulture summer camp, and he was able to organize me a kontiki kiln. And yeah, but my basics, I suppose, is that, composting interest, but I'd like in time to look at what mixes might look like or feeding it to livestock, but I haven't gone down that path yet. It's been a bit with my work, just trying to settle into actually having a space where I can regularly make the stuff.
Yeah. So when was that you went to the summer camp and all that and met Phil and got into the biochar and started making it the first time?
Oh, it's been about 5-6 years.
All right. And what's your favorite method of making biochar and why?
I'd really like to be doing the retort method, and that, so a more enclosed, quite like looking at the Pyrolitech ones, but I haven't got around to actually having one. The kontiki kiln's really good, but a bit more labor intensive to keep loading it. And with me having students, I feel like there's a little bit more of a safety risk having an open fire, though very manageable risk. And I'm not expecting any trouble doing it with my students, who are quite mature in general. I don't bring it out otherwise. Whereas the retort, I like the idea, and not that I generally see this with, is like that you could have like a cage to be like preloading and loading in, and then making your wood vinegars from it. Those wood vinegars can have potential for a organic pesticide, as where I'm at the moment. I can't go and spray glyphosate around. JJ's would definitely not be happy with that. And then like the seed starting side of it, where you can dilute it, 1 in 100, and use it to promote seed growth and sort of mimicking, BOG, how you make biochar, which is a forest fire, which is often when I'm talking to people about it, where I relate it back to. It's not some newfangled thing that I've come up with and I think it's great. It's as natural as forest fires.
Yeah, I like that link between forest fires and germination. That makes a lot of sense, actually.
But the plant, it's one of those, the plants know that there's some canopy space for them, so it's not surprising that triggering is that heat and that acidification can be triggering for them to go, now's my moment. get in while there's space.
Yeah. It's a good wake-up call. How old are the students that you're working with?
Our core should be 18 to 24, but we will take, we take people retraining. Like one of my students, for example, is a retraining nurse at the moment who's decided that she wants to do some part-time work in horticulture. So although that's my base, we've had a bit of a funny few years. We got bought out by a corporate, and some of our regular ways we got students has changed. So it's been a bit hard to recruit, as well as I think there's a bit of a sign of the economic times that people are making hard choices between study and just needing to go and get a job and earn some money.
Yeah. So you say that the training organization now is corporate, so that means they're trying to make profit out of training. Then do they get funding from the government or something to train students? Is that how they make their money?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're funded by the Tertiary Education Commission, and the same as before. I think the main point of emphasis has been we've got like our way that we recruit has probably changed, and not like we've got the head office in Auckland who do that recruitment side, which is really nice, but probably not enough people on the ground just talking to people face to face, whether that's at your MSDs or with their support workers, to actually encourage them to come on. Like often if we don't have that, I tend to get middle-aged women who want to do something during the day, as opposed to getting that youth guarantee side of things really requires someone going and encouraging them. They're often not self-selecting, because high school, for example, is often not worked out for them.
Yeah. And so then are you training like students to do a horticulture Cert 3 or Cert 4? Is that kind of the stuff you're doing?
Ongoing, we're doing a Cert 2, which is general horticulture, which also can be harder to recruit for because it's got literacy and numeracy, and if you've got that inferior, you're overqualified. And then the level 3 strand that they're just redoing, and I'll be teaching later this year, is focusing on the nursery side of things, which works out well with JJ's, and that they've got the veggie side, and then there's enough space that we can, as we are through this course, developing the cutting side of proliferating what we can be growing.
Yeah, okay. Sounds interesting. It'd be nice if there was a level 3 in biochar or a level 2 in biochar even.
It's on my to-do list for like they're still resettling in what these courses look like, moving them across to their systems, all of that sort of stuff that happens when a business gets bought, especially by a larger entity, which was all looking positive. But I totally hear what you're saying. It's like whether it's a micro qualification or something like that. I'd love the Workplace Development Council to develop it, and when I've tried pitching it internally, which I obviously haven't been successful with yet, but talking about the carbon negative student turning, or if you're talking about someone who's currently on a benefit with MSD, that they can turn themselves, that person, to be carbon negative, whereas we're all in general carbon emitters, but having that as a skill that can be trained, and a pitch for funding, like when you're talking about the point of difference between why would you go with us as a provider or another provider if we're both providing adequate horticulture level 3 training, comparable on that front. But why would you go with us over the other one? It could be we sequester so many tons of carbon a year. I would like to see that more valued as a way when government organisations are looking at procurement. That's something they could consider with what organisations they preferentially give funding to.
Yeah. I was thinking more along the lines of actually training people in biochar production so that they can start their own business or join another business. Someone like Southland Carbon down near where I am, Andrew's struggled quite a bit to find someone to run his machine. Like someone into biochar would really help. And then, Andrew could train them up, but they'd need to know the fundamentals and be into it. And a level 3 or level 4 course where people do a year's worth of training of wood selection and how to build a kiln, how to operate it. I mean, there's so much that could be put in there. Biochar is quite complex, and we need people to be skilled up, I think.
I'd agree with you there. There often it becomes like these workshops, which are very good and people get a lot out of, but they're probably not putting on their CV after a day of having some practice with a kiln. Like I say, there's a lot of components to it, which probably you take for granted at points when you're breaking down the subject.
Yeah, 1 day course is just a bit of a taster, really. It takes quite a few burns before you really can know what you're doing, and even then, once you start thinking about wood vinegars and wood tar and blending it with compost and stuff, I think it can be there's a lot of detail. It's actually quite an interesting idea of whether the NNZ maybe could put together a framework for a course and pitch that somewhere in New Zealand to the Qualifications Authority, or I don't know, you'd probably know better who to pitch it to, but
it sounds like one that I haven't got to, it's above my pay grade, but it's generally the workplace development councils which are developing, those sorts of novel courses. But for the purpose that you're talking about, that there's an outcome that someone could go into work based upon having that, I think that is really important, especially for it to be an industry in New Zealand. Because there's the biochar, it's just the carbon sequestering side, but that's what needs to happen on every bit of land. Slowly putting that carbon that's in the atmosphere back where it came from.
Yeah. And have you thought about making biochar your main income earner and making a business of it?
I was looking at that prior to doing this teaching job. That's where I got the kiln from initially, and the capital that I felt like I would need was not accessible for me at the time. I have talked with there's a few local people who have had some proposals, and similarly, accessing the capital and put it all together, sometimes feels a long way from the business plans that you come up with. But I'm sort of this year I'm hoping to be get a bit more settled with JJ's, but that being a publicly accessible hub, I think there's potential there. But it doesn't have to be all in on biochar being the primary form of income, which is what I was trying to do before, but it's sort of more naturally fits into my day, and I can add value by being a teacher and potentially running workshops. But at the moment this year, I think a lot of people are just trying to keep their head down with the fuel, election year, all that sort of jazz, just making sure that what's keeping them afloat at the moment is enough, at least.
Yeah. Okay. So that photo that's on the BNNZ website of you standing between 2 kilns? Where is that?
That's at my house.
Okay.
And that was it's a work in progress. I'll blame the day job for enough time in the day, but there I was looking at what a setup could look like for the other side, which I think people struggle with, is you've made the biochar, it's reducing it to, breaking it up into small enough size for the use that you want to have it for, or, making those mixtures to add to it, whether it's for feeding to animals or composting. That if you don't have those tools, it can start feeling like a very physical job to be able to make the product that you'd want.
Yeah. So is that silver contraption on the right, is that a grinder to grind it up or something?
Yeah, that's like I did basically use it as a grinder. It's like a giant mixing bowl so that you can start breaking up, and then there's like a little slit so you were able to separate roughly based on size. Nothing too big was going through, and then there was a trommel next to that. So for those who don't know, trommel is a horizontal rotating drum with sieve holes in it, and from that you could in theory separate based on size for getting a small enough biochar out, and it worked fairly well. It's just that keeping that whole process going, and just looking at that when you start to scale, like, and you have to employ staff and buy equipment, and I just didn't feel confident to really go out and get heavily into that. That's why I'm loving to hear what Andrew's doing to find success with that down at South and Carbon.
Yeah, I think with the biochar business, I think there's two quite distinct scales. One is high commercial output for, almost getting it to that level of being able to apply it to pasture, getting the production high enough so that the cost is low enough so that that can actually happen. But I think then the other side of it is a much more bespoke, a product that's really made for certain applications. So that's what come in with all the different mixes, probably more orientating towards gardeners and stuff like that, or maybe in the horticulture industry for potting mixes and stuff, but more specialist blends. And where you're making a customized product where you're really identifying someone's need and then making a custom product for them. But I know what you mean. Otherwise, it's quite difficult to scale things up because you basically got to mechanize everything, and that becomes expensive. And then also look at employing people. So yeah, it's a tricky one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's one thing. I feel like I saw it in the South African one. There was one thing these retorts don't have, and I think these were more a continuous contraption. Is they had like a rotating like a metal grate, I suppose you'd call it, which dropped it into the water, which was one where it was sort of doing that sizing as you went, and then you could keep adding on top, which seemed like like you say, it's a real challenge to try and make a plan to make it easy to do. And I think I've seen, with even since some of the stuff that I've had and not been successful and seen what I've done over the years, like the solutions are out there. It's just one person has a good idea, makes it, but it doesn't necessarily become massive. Like Pyrolitech's probably the one who seems, at least in our neck of the woods, to be the most successful with proliferating the ideas they have, or some the kiln ones, because they require a lot less engineering to make compared to I'm like looking at this beautiful trailer they've got, but I dread to think what the cost of all of that was.
Yeah. What's the name of the people locally then that you've mentioned?
Pyrolitech is an Australian-based company that has what looks like a similar setup to Slash for Cash, and they sell plans to be able to go and make your own in your local area.
I see.
It's a couple of $1,000s for the plan, like I said, and then you've still got to build it. So you start going, am I committing to this? But I think that it's a good model, and I'm just not rich enough to take advantage of it.
Yeah. All right. Is there anything else that you would like to chat about today? What other interests do you have relating to biochar?
But the one I've put in, it's probably around that. Like, how do we track this? Like, when you've been good, you've applied biochar to your area, you maybe fed it to an animal, and like on your farm, and it's gone out and sprayed. It's like when I come, whether it's to sell my farm or tell my stakeholders how I'm doing, I feel like that some way to be tracking that. Like, it doesn't need to be exact, but it's like you've bought that biochar in, you've applied. It's like I'd love some sort of way to be better able to track that, which could in time be for knowing, why is my farm worth more than your farm? Because I've sequestered all this carbon. But at the moment, I feel like it's always quite anecdotal when it comes to people saying how much they've applied, or they've just got started and got into it, which is great. But yeah, it's all that policy stuff that is often above our heads and is hard to interact with the likes of an MPI. But some sort of centralized spot so you can say, I bought this biochar, we know it was good stuff, I fed it to my animals, it got spread out, or I spread it over this area, and you could be quite exact or quite general just doing it. And there'd be some way to verify that, because it stays within the soil, but just broadly to go, where are people applying biochar in this country? And we know some spots, but I also think there's a lot of places where people do it where we don't know. And giving me, I suppose it's what I'm saying is, what tool could exist to enable people to do that, or as well as like the trade, like I have biomass, you have biochar kiln, like what that could look like on a map to be able to help people connect up. And problem is user bases as well. I've seen that with like wood chips. Like there was a cool one in New Zealand, but populating those is always, people make these tools, but they become very challenging to scale up and actually get people on and pay for it once again to have people benefit.
Yeah. I mean, when I first got to know being in bed and I went to one of the first meetings, the first thing I was asking is, why doesn't New Zealand have its own carbon exchange for biochar? And what you've said there is right. It costs a lot of money to do it, and it gets quite complicated. I agree with what you're saying, but at the same time, I think it will come in time. I think with the carbon credit system, you probably know a little bit about carbon credits, but like we still don't have that system yet where you get paid when you put biochar into your soil. I mean, I think that would help more people apply it more and record it. But I think in the meantime, while we wait for those things to come, I think it's important just to go out there and do it for your own benefit. So if you've got livestock and you feed it to your cows, your benefit's going to be there. You're going to get better milk, you're going to get healthier cows, and your pasture's going to improve. If you then sell your farm in 10 years' time, well, you might not get that value back, but in those 10 years, your cows have been way more productive and healthier. So I think people have to be a bit selfish at this point in time and just do it for your own benefit. Put it in your own garden where you're growing food and you get the rewards.
I agree with you there. There's certainly that component as well. And like you say, it's that policy stuff. It's not very like define biochar or what are the testing standards. And it's cool, seeing what's going in Oz and hopefully seeing some of its success there, it gets picked up. But like I say, I agree. Do it for yourself. I'm looking forward to, for my own benefit, they've got a whole piles of woody biomass at JJ's and they'll benefit from having more land, but it's not covered in this stuff, having it within their greenhouses, which is quite a defined area, and we can know how much is there. And then when the policy catches up, I would imagine there's ways to bring people into the fold from, if you like, the legacy biochar appliers. They usually are pretty good at working out how to integrate the grandfathers, if you like.
Yeah, I just have my own spreadsheet and I record every time putting it in the buckets. I'm recording that in a spreadsheet, taking a photo of it. So I've got my own record of how much I'm sequestering. And if someone at some point that I meet goes, oh, I'd love to offset my carbon footprint, I can go, hey, I've put in, 2,000 liters over this time. You can pay me some money and I'll make some more. There is that potential possibility, but at the scale that I'm doing it at, where I'm just doing several hundred liters a year, it's probably not really worth it. I'm just doing it for my own benefits. So I'm happy with that at the moment. And like you say, using waste wood, clearing up somewhere, there's dead tree in the way, you turn it into biochar, you put it in your compost toilet, we put it into our greenhouse, into our veggie gardens. We're getting the benefit back anyway. And we know it's sequestering carbon and offsetting our own personal footprints. So I'm quite happy with that.
And that scenario you described, if there's not policy that defines what biochar is, and if you could make the argument like there's important reasons obviously for climate change to sequester carbon, but for that business that's wanting to offset and say, look how good we are, buy our products as we're clean and green, that can be relatively informal, but you say that you've done it, but you've given them some proof in case anyone comes at them, but they can say that this is the project they're supporting and put a poster up, and that can be enough for them, them to value what you're doing, you to offset their carbon, and for the customer to go, oh, I'll buy into that someone's doing a good thing, and that's the point of difference that makes me want to go with them over someone else. So, similar with, like I was saying, with government and picking providers for who's training students and sequestering carbon there. It's like, it's a level of on trust and on brand, and marketing there, but backed up by something like your spreadsheet to prove that it really has happened. And it's in your compost. If someone doesn't believe you, you stick their head in the dirt.
Yeah. Well, I hope your bosses at your training institute will take your idea and run with it and use it as a point of differentiation. What did you do before you were doing the current job that you're in now?
I studied chemistry at uni, which I loved. I did natural product chemistry in my 4th year. Did a project looking at making a different version of curcumin, which is main component of turmeric, so making some different natural products. When I say my career mistake was not sticking with study, I went to Hawke's Bay and I did lab tech work, which I enjoyed, but you didn't really need a chem degree for. And then I went a little wayward. I went down to Christchurch and I managed Filipino construction workers in the rebuild, which then took me up to Wellington, where I studied a business course. Once they basically told me to move to Auckland, and Auckland's not my idea of a good time, so I moved on. And then I was involved with the Opportunity Party during the Jeff Simmons era. So I was admin dog's body and supporter of Jeff's campaign in Rongotai, which was an excellent experience. Continued to support them in Hawke's Bay. And then, I came back to Hawke's Bay, tried the biochar business, but was not successful. Not successful yet, I should say. I haven't given up hope. And then I did some odd jobs. I was doing making concrete sculptures at a local business here called Pacific Garden Art. I think we did one biochar sculpture for the funds of it, just to have a bit of black in there, a bit of charcrete. And then I got a job at Eastern Bridge Education doing ESOL at the Do You Want to Earn a Little Money from a Friend, which I didn't mind, but I struggled with the problem of ESOL that my students didn't speak English and a bit elderly and were struggling to improve. And we reached a point where funding went a little bit funny, and my boss said, do you want to do horticulture? And I thought, yeah, it sort of connected with my science background, my experience growing up in the backpackers, doing some work in the industry. I was like, brilliant, and haven't looked back since. It's been 3 years now. And yeah, I enjoy that teaching. So especially the adult teaching. I'm not sure I want to go into a high school, but I certainly like where I'm at now. I'm out in the garden most of the day, bit of computer work, teaching and all of that. But mostly I'm out in the sun all day, which make people jealous when I talk about jobs at parties.
As long as it's not raining, eh?
Well, then I can go inside. It's, I'm pretty flexible with how I get to deliver it. And also this, I find local, there was Puke Mokamoka Marae down the road, which, needed some weeding, was one of them. Pacific Garden Art, which was heavily hit by the cyclone and cleaning up the greenhouse. JJ's, which got, like I said earlier, they basically has been slowly being taken over by nature for probably the last 5 to 10 years before it was sold 2 years ago. But my job allows me to, for support of my students and the organization, to go to these places and go, this is mutually beneficial. My students benefit, you benefit, I benefit having a place to teach and access to greenhouses. But you get that feel good at the end of the day that the students, all these different stakeholders have benefited through use of this funding. I joke, but it's a way to get your taxes back, but don't say it too loud.
Yeah, but it's a great thing. I think, if there's a crew like that going around and helping and teaching people at the same time, I think it's a great model.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, but it's the great bit about land-based training, that with that flexibility in delivery and the support of the organisation, you get to go and do that sort of stuff.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about the sculpture. Tell us about putting the char into the concrete.
Sand it's the second most consumed resource on the planet, and we just were like, well, what happens if you sub some of that sand out to see what it looks like, and you get like a different hue, like you can put different additives in to change the color, and this obviously you get quite a black color, and then biochar between the sand and the cement, it sort of acts as like a nuclear, like the sand of it stuff can bind around the biochar, so it helps it stick together quite well, as well as just reduces the amount of sand that you have to use, and then offsets see all of concrete that you're using. The cement all has a carbon footprint associated with it. So for my mind, it was in theory balancing out your carbon footprint. I'm not sure one small model any worth counting about, but that potential for, if you got your cost of biochar comparable, it could be another point of difference for him when he's selling these. Lots of people can make concrete sculptures, but if you're making the one which is sequestering so much biochar within it, then maybe the customer chooses you than the person down the road.
Yeah. What percentage would you say you put in of char?
It was I think we did about 10%. It's a number of years ago now.
Yeah, we did make a sculpture when I was still in Australia, and it was made out of cob, and then we put a lime plaster over it. But then we put char into the lime plaster mix to try and make it black. And we could only really get a dark grey colour. Even if we put more and more and more char in it, the black colour wouldn't come through. Did you find that? What did you just?
Yeah, I would. It certainly wasn't. Yeah, it was more like a grey than a jet black. But it was a bit lighter, which wasn't like necessarily the difference maker for this gentleman. But he was, he's heading towards retirement, whether he actually ever does. But he was going to the market less because of a physical challenge, reducing the weight of the piece. Or if he's shipping stuff's based on weight, you can start looking for. Sometimes with what's the point of difference, it can just be something comparatively small like that, right? Why would I choose for a percentage biochar or a certain percentage sand?
But I think you can get the percentage up a lot higher than 10% with some experimentation and making sure it's the right size. I think you could probably get it up quite a bit higher, and therefore you would make quite a difference in the end weight.
Yeah, it's one. Maybe I need to have a play again, just rather than for work, just for my own joy. And one of the other bits within that is because it's got that biochar structure, it could just be more up your 40% range and just using the cement as a binder, and then you could be growing like your mosses on it. But you're having that concrete actually being a net positive by having your mosses, that it's able to buffer your air pollution. You're being able to catch stuff, as opposed to concrete doesn't breathe and doesn't breathe life. So it's one, maybe it's along a side of a building that you're actually able to have those moss walls of the like.
Green wall.
Yeah, your green, that's what I was looking for. Could you hear me struggling?
Okay, a natural green wall that just kind of grows by itself. The moss will just come in quite quickly, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah, or I'm sure you could dose it if you wanted to speed up that process. Yeah, possibility. I'll let you know if you've inspired me. If I ever do, I'll send you a picture.
Yeah, no, I do. Very good. Yeah. All right.
Good.
Thanks so much for having a chat today, James. It's been really interesting, and I hope you have some success with your bosses.
Yeah. I think that will be the big one. Cool. Well, thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for listening.